We're now joined by Mike Scarborough, TigerBait.com, LSU, Georgia, SEC championship game. Mike covers the Tigers, and of course, coming off that very not good look against A&M at Kyle Field last Saturday. Mike, thanks for your time. Obviously, I mean, they can bounce back. What are the chances? On a scale of 1 to 100, do you give LSU for beating Georgia?
10%?
Okay.
It's look, LSU's not they're not in a good way physically right now. Not having Bernard Converse in College Station, we'll see what he's like this week if he's able to go. Jaden Daniels hurt his ankle. I know what Brian Kelly said yesterday, that he's had a good week of practice. I'm not too sure about that. We'll see. We might be seeing a good dose of Garrett Nussmeier tomorrow.
How confident should people be in Garrett Nussmeier to run the offense? Obviously, be different because one of the best things that Jaden Daniels does is on third down. He can just get that first down and keep the drive going.
Yeah, and that's what Georgia does. Their opponents have a 26% conversion rate on third downs, and that's something that Brian Kelly talked about early in the week, is not getting in those long distances. And that's something that when Jaden Daniels is 100%, you don't want to put him in a bunch of third and eights. But with his ability to move him out and take off and run and get to the marker, he's done that all season long, but he wasn't very effective at it last weekend. And you had some receivers with some drops. There was a whole lot of things that just didn't go right for LSU and College Station. But I warned everybody that whole week that something like that was going to happen. A&M was going to give LSU their best shot. It was their Super Bowl, not bowl eligible, and sure enough, it happened. So, but LSU has still exceeded expectations. I said starting the season that I thought the A&M game would decide whether LSU's 7-5 or 8-4, and so they finished at 9-3, and that's just we were calling anybody who was predicting LSU to go 9-3 in the summer, we were calling them homers. So it's really astonishing what Brian Kelly did when he inherited 39 scholarship football players.
So if I were to ask you how deflating was that loss last week, would it not be as deflating because they're still going to the SEC title game and they're exceeding expectations? Or
what will be deflating is if things go to where what is expected. Georgia's a 16, 17-point favorite depending on where you look. And so if that goes to, that happens that way, or LSU gets beat significantly, they've all of a sudden gone from, 2 weeks ago being a possibility to get into the playoffs with 2 losses to all of a sudden not being in a New Year's Day bowl, and then possibly even if they get beat badly, being overtaken by South Carolina for the Citrus Bowl and ended up somewhere lesser than that. So, but at the same time, it's like, look, there was some weeks in September where people were wondering if this team could get to 6-6. Mm-hmm. And so it's look, that win over Alabama was a huge deal for the season. And I just think the program is ahead of schedule regardless. But we'll see how it plays out here. See, the other problem you get into is if you're not in anything major bowl wise, what are your opt-outs going to be?
Yep.
How many opt-outs do you have? And so that's the problem at places like LSU, that if you have a number of opt-outs, you go to a mid-level bowl game and you look downright awful because most of a good number of your big-time players aren't out there playing for you.
What is their recruiting picture right now with signing day just around the corner? Kelly obviously has done a nice job. LSU always is in the mix. Where are they for right now?
Well, look, they had a couple of decommitments. One of them was a head scratcher a couple of weeks ago. A kid decommitted and committed to Auburn without knowing who their next head football coach was going to be. And Auburn's throwing NIL money around. I'm told that they got a $13 or $14 million war chest that they're spreading around. Another kid's talking about visiting there. It's on LSU's commitment list. But I think we're about to see a whole lot of crazy. I think the transfer portal, what we're going to see kids that hop in there next week and the next few weeks, and then how quickly some of this. I think some of the turnaround times that we're going to see where a kid hits the portal and then is announced where he's going, it's going to be so bang bang that it's going to be obvious to everybody that the tampering that's been going on is off the chain.
DeColdis Crawford, one of those guys you think could wind up at LSU?
No, because I think LSU parted ways with him when he was a commitment to LSU. He had the name. He got an early offer from Ed Orgeron's staff, but I don't see him being a receiver that is at the quality at the SEC level.
Mike, Georgia, obviously a juggernaut, as you mentioned, the big point spread here, undefeated on the season, bound for the playoff no matter what, and plenty of questions on LSU's side, particularly starting with Daniels and his health. But where do you see some rays of light? Where do you see some openings, if any, as far as this matchup goes that could be to LSU's advantage or things that they could potentially do to mess with the Bulldogs?
Well, one of the things that is said about Georgia is that their secondary is not very good. Well, you have to have a quarterback who's willing to let it go. And look, I think another part of the problem that you have is that you've got some wide receivers for LSU that, in some recent games are not finishing off their routes, or maybe they're not going 100% on their routes because their confidence level in Daniels getting them the ball and where it's going to be is that it's not going to be there. And so, I think they've got to be able to run the ball. I think they're going to need a turnover or two from Georgia. I think they need to start quickly. Don't get behind a score or two immediately. Jaden Daniels comes out and or he ends up not being the guy, and Nussmeier goes out there. I think this one could really get away from LSU. The third-party ticket market, all those tickets are going to Georgia fans. They're lining up, and they really want this. People forget they did not win the SEC championship last year. They were national champions, but they were not SEC champions. And you got a group of guys on that team that would like to get that SEC championship ring. I think what LSU's 3-1 or something like that against 4-1 against Georgia in SEC title games. They have not had a very good record in these games, despite it being a home field for them.
As far as LSU being a surprise for what they are doing, and by the way, Akron just was picked off. Buffalo beat Akron 23-22. That's 20 seconds left, last play of the game. They're going to win that game. The LSU team's obviously been a surprise where they are. Who was the second most surprising team? Was it South Carolina, the way they ended? And I'm talking in a good way. Who would be in that mix? I mean, Tennessee, I guess, would have to be a part of that. But anyone else?
Yeah, and look, had LSU beaten A&M, you tell me who's SEC Coach of the Year if you don't just give all the awards to the team that wins the championship and has the undefeated record, right?
Yeah.
Typically, if you look at an all-SEC team, to the victor goes the spoils. LSU saw that in 2019. They got all the kids on their SEC and won all the postseason awards. But in reality, Georgia was supposed to be there or in the mix. But, LSU was picked fifth in the SEC West. And they're going to Atlanta and beat Alabama and beat Auburn, Florida, the first coach to beat Auburn, Florida on the road ever. Saban never did that. In 2003, Chris Leak came to Tiger Stadium and beat LSU when they won the national championship over Oklahoma.
Mike, thanks for your time and enjoy. Appreciate it. It'll be interesting to know what happens. LSU's been obviously capable of pulling off the big one with what they did against Alabama, and then obviously smoked by Tennessee, and then the surprising loss to A&M to end the season. Mike Scarborough, TigerBait.com with us on LSU, Georgia, SEC championship game. That is, of course, tomorrow